These are the most devastating accidents in motorsports history, and unfortunately things only keep getting worse as the video progresses. The last cases are truly heartbreaking. Formula 1 is a sport where drivers push themselves to the absolute limit, reaching speeds of over 200 miles per hour. And for one young talented driver, a single mistake on a wet track would change everything. Jules Bianchi was a rising star. Born in France, he already started racing go-karts at the age of 3, and from the moment he started, there was no slowing him down. His family already had deep roots in the motorsport industry, with a lot of them being incredibly skilled race drivers. And very similar to them, he quickly made a name for himself. After dominating the lower Formula categories, such as Formula Renault 2, where he finished as the champion 5 times, he managed to be signed by Ferrari as a reserve driver. This was a huge deal. Ferrari picking him as a reserve meant that they truly believed in his talent and saw a future in him. They don't just pick anybody as their backup. But that wasn't it. Ferrari also helped him join the Marussia F1 team in 2013. A team that wasn't great. It had one of the slowest cars on the track, but he finally had the chance to compete in the big leagues. And Jules managed to deliver a performance that would go down in F1 history. At the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix, Jules finished 9th place, scoring Marussia's first and only points in F1. His talent was undeniable, but just a few months later, everything would change. It's the Formula 1 World Championship, specifically the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix. The weather isn't great, it's rainy, and a typhoon is approaching, but nonetheless, the athletes are ready to compete. The race is intense from the get-go. Due to the heavy rain, the visibility is awful, and the wetness of the track makes it harder to determine how much control one actually has over their own car. Several racers already have close calls, nearly crashing. When on lap 43, Adrian Sutil, another driver, loses control. He crashes into the barriers. It's nothing tragic though. The marshals quickly deploy a recovery vehicle and work on removing Adrian's car. It's nothing uncommon. Crashes happen quite often at these speeds. But then, just one lap later, a nightmare unfolds. Jules approaches the same corner at over 130 miles per hour. And he doesn't slow down enough and loses control over his car. The wet track offers no grip and his car slides off at full speed. But he doesn't just crash into the barriers. He drives directly into the spot where Adrian crashed. He collides into the back of the recovery vehicle. The force of the collision is catastrophic. His car dives under the tractor crane, and the impact is so severe it registers at 254 Gs, one of the most violent crashes in motorsport history, and the highest G-force measured in F1. The top of his car is completely destroyed. Marshals and medical teams rush to his aid, and the team just asks over the radio, "Are you okay, Jules?" But he doesn't respond. He's unconscious. There's no movement, and his helm is shattered. The damage to his car is horrific, and the race is stopped on lap 44. Jules is rushed to Mi General Hospital in Japan, where he's diagnosed with severe brain injury. The doctors have to perform emergency surgery, but unfortunately he doesn't wake up. He remains in a coma for a total of 9 months when on July 17, 2015, he passes away. His death marked the first fatality in Formula 1 since the 3-time champion Ayrton Senna died 20 years prior, who I will cover soon too. But this next case is so tragic that even his rivals stopped practicing racing completely. It's September 1st, 1985. The 1000 km of Spa is about to begin at the legendary Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium. Part of the World Sports Car Championship, the 1000 km format isn't about pure speed. It's about endurance and grit. Teams of multiple drivers take turns, competing against the other teams, as they drive their cars for 5 to 6 hours, until they hit the 1000 kilometers or 621 mile mark. Among the competitors is Stefan Belov, a driver widely regarded as one of the greatest natural talents in this scene. At just 27, he had already made a name for himself in both Formula 1 and sports car racing. A multi-talent, you could say. Just 2 years prior, in 1983, Stefan set the fastest lap ever recorded at the Nürburgring Nordschleife while qualifying for the 1000 kilometer race. He got a time of 6 minutes and 11.13 seconds. A record so fast actually, it would remain unbeaten for 35 years. This was a man who lived for speed and competition, but on this very day it would cost him his life. Stefan Belov is driving the Porsche 956, one of the fastest cars in the world, and the race is going well. It's approaching the third hour, with Paulo Barilla being first, while Stefan and Jackie X are fighting over second place. After a quick pit stop, Jackie is ahead of Stefan and prevents him from overtaking for 3 whole laps. And then lap 78 happens. Stefan is chasing Jackie down the Rouge-Rédillon complex, one of the most dangerous sections of any racing circuit because of how easy it is to lose grip. Stefan closes in on Jackie and then he goes for it. He dives to the inside and tries to overtake Jackie, but something goes wrong. Their cars touch at over 180 miles per hour and Stefan's Porsche loses control. In a split second, the car is flung off the racing line, sliding sideways towards the guardrail. There's no time to react. Jackie spins up the hill into the barriers and destroys a good chunk of the car, but he himself is fine, at least physically. Stefan, however, slams right into the wall at 130 miles per hour. The impact is so violent that the car is ripped apart and it erupts in fire instantly. The marshals rush to the scene. Jackie slows down the car and pulls to the side. They all run towards the accident, but there is nothing they can do to save him. The race is immediately stopped and medical teams cut Stefan out of the car and take him to the medical center. But at 4:20 p.m., he's pronounced dead. Jackie X, despite walking away from the accident physically unharmed, would later say that this was the crash that changed him forever. He would never drive in sports car racing again. Not everybody has the chance to walk away after such a tragic accident. Marco Simoncelli wasn't one of those fortunate enough to do so. October 23rd, 2011. The Malaysian Grand Prix at the Sepang International Circuit is supposed to be just another day in the history of motorcycle racing. There is a possibility of rain which make everything more difficult, but that wasn't unusual for Malaysia. Nobody expected the unfortunate event that would happen that very day. Marco Simoncelli was born to race. Growing up in Italy, he fell in love with motorcycles at just 7 years old. He would race around the town of Coriano with his mini bikes and unknowingly practice his skills for his future career. Before you knew it, he won multiple championships and even national titles. It was clear that he had a gift. And he wasn't just fast, he was fearless, even reckless, people might say. In 2001, he moved up to the Italian 125cc championship, and in his very first rookie season, he already achieved something impeccable. He won the title. For the people who don't know, the 125cc category was the entry-level class in the World Championship, where young drivers are able to develop their skills before moving on to bigger and faster bikes. And the next year, Marco topped it off by winning the European 125cc championship. And that was just the beginning for him. By 2003, Marco had reached the 125 World Championship, where he competed against the best young racers in the entire world. And in 2004, he got his first win. Fast forward 4 years and Marco moved up to the 250 class. And this is where he became a superstar. In 16 races, he managed to place top 3 12 times, win 6 times, and win 1 world championship. He was quite literally on the fast track to becoming a star. In 2010, Marco made the jump to MotoGP, which is the big leagues of motorcycle races. And after getting a factory Honda bike, his career was ready to skyrocket. He secured his first ever MotoGP pole position in Catalunya and finished in the top 3 at the Czech Grand Prix. His career best was 2nd place in Australia, which meant that he was finally competing with the best riders in the world. But not everybody was a big fan of Marco. He had a very aggressive riding style that already led to multiple crashes. People called him a reckless athlete, and unfortunately things would not pan out great for the young man. It's lap 2 already of the Malaysian Grand Prix. Marco is running in 4th place, trying everything to move up the order, when suddenly Marco's rear tire loses grip. Normally a crash like that would simply send a rider sliding off the track, but this time it's different. Things go horribly wrong. Instead of simply falling, his bike suddenly regains traction, which is the worst case scenario. This sudden grip pulls Marco's bike back into the racing line, directly into the path of Colin Edwards and Valentino Rossi, 2 other people who are racing. At over 120 miles per hour, Marco is hit head-on by both riders. The force of the collision is so intense that his helmet is completely ripped off, something that should never ever happen under any circumstance. The race is stopped. Trackside medics rush to Marco's side, but the injuries are catastrophic. He suffers severe trauma to his head, neck and chest. For 45 minutes, doctors fight to save his life, but at 4:56 p.m. he passes away. His racing number 58 is permanently retired from MotoGP, and the race was cancelled. This next race could have been a legendary ending for a father-son duo, but unfortunately it turned into a horrible disaster. Nascar is one of the most popular motorsports in the United States, and among its legends stands Dale Earnhardt, a 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, also known as the Intimidator. Dale had this very aggressive and no-nonsense racing style that made him a fan favorite. With 76 career wins and 7 championships, he conquered almost every major NASCAR event. But for years, one victory was always taken away from him: the Daytona 500, the pinnacle of stock car racing. That would change in 1998, when after 20 attempts, he would be able to claim his victory. What Dale didn't know was that the same event would cost him his life just 3 years later. With around 200,000 people attending live and millions of viewers watching on TV, the 2001 Daytona 500 was going to be a historic race. This time, Dale wasn't just a person competing, he was also a team owner, with his Dale Earnhardt Inc. cars running at the front. But the first bad signs already show up on lap 173. A huge accident involving 18 cars takes place. Jason Leffler loses control and triggers a massive chain reaction, with cars flipping over multiple times after being hit. Now, God knows how, despite the crash looking so violent, no drivers are seriously injured, with Dale Earnhardt and his crew escaping any damage at all. The race continues, with Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 1st and 2nd place, with Dale being right behind them. He was actively blocking the other cars to protect the position of his son and the very person he mentored. They were both going to finish as the top 2, no matter what. Dale is an extremely competitive person, but in this race, it simply doesn't matter if he finishes first. But then, on the very last lap of the race, on turn 4, Sterling Marlin's car comes in contact with Dale's left rear fender. Now, it isn't a big collision, but at these speeds, it's all that it takes. Dale tries to control his car, but it snaps to the right, sending him into the outside wall at 160 miles per hour, with Ken Schrader hitting Dale as well, and they both crash into the wall. It's not a massive accident, and both cars actually manage to stop on the grass. Now, while that is happening in the back, Dale is able to see his protege Michael Waltrip win the race, with Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 2nd place. After 16 years of racing, Mike was able to secure his first win with his friend and mentor on his side. Now, although that moment was beautiful, what looked like a very light crash involving Dale quickly changed the atmosphere of the entire event. Ken Schrader got out of his car to check up on Dale, but after some time, he simply wasn't coming out, and so Ken calls for medical attention. Dale seems to be unconscious. An ambulance arrives, and they pull Dale out of his car and drive him off. And while Ken was absolutely fine, at 5:16 p.m., Dale Earnhardt is pronounced dead on arrival. He had suffered a skull fracture caused by the force of his head whipping forward upon impact. The injury was instantly fatal. NASCAR lost its greatest champion, with the top two finishers losing a piece of themselves. 4 days after his death, his funeral took place at the Calvary Church in North Carolina, with thousands of people attending, including family, friends, and of course his racing colleagues. Now, just a couple of years prior, the world lost a legend in F1 too that upset millions. It's April 29th, 1994, a day full of excitement. This was not any other race weekend. It was the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, and it would soon become the most tragic weekend in sports history. Even before race day, something felt off. The paddock, the area at the track where teams set up their garages and work on their cars, was tense, and the events that unfolded would confirm their worst fears. Ayrton Senna, three-time world champion, arrives at the track early in the morning for Friday practice. This is the first session of the weekend, but his team Williams is still struggling with their car. Senna openly criticized it for being too difficult to handle. Despite its powerful engine, the car simply lacked stability. He had already failed to finish the previous two races of the season because of that car. In the season opener at the Brazilian Grand Prix, Senna spun out while chasing Michael Schumacher, but still managed to finish in the top 3. And at the Pacific Grand Prix, he was again at the pole but was hit from behind, causing him to spin out again. The car was a hit or miss. During the practice rounds, however, Senna still managed to complete the fastest time out there, outpacing his teammates. But that didn't change the fact that he was just not satisfied with the setting of the car. He knew his team had to improve, so he worked on the car for hours with his engineers, searching for solutions. 1 p.m. was the first qualifying session of the day, and Senna was absolutely flying. He rises to the top of the leaderboard. However, just 15 minutes later, Rubens Barrichello suffers a terrifying crash during practice. His Jordan car goes airborne, slamming into the barriers at 140 miles per hour. The impact is brutal. Ruben is knocked unconscious for several minutes. Luckily, the tires absorb most of the impact, and he gets away with only a broken nose and minor injuries. After Senna made sure that everything was alright, he continued like always, just a bit more nervous than usual, since he had a car with no stability. But that wouldn't be the only accident during the qualifying sessions. The next day, during the second qualifying session at 1:18 p.m., Roland Ratzenberger, a 33-year-old Austrian driver, suffers a front wing failure.
And Ratzenberger has had a heavy shunt indeed.
His car plows straight into a concrete barrier at 196 miles per hour. The entire team watches in horror. The impact is absolutely catastrophic. Senna, watching from the garage, knows instantly. This is different. This is serious. The medical team rushes to the scene, as well as Senna, but it's too late. Roland is pronounced dead. Senna is devastated. Inside of the medical center, he meets Sid Watkins, a close friend of his and Formula One's chief medical officer. As they talk, Sid can tell that Senna is overwhelmed with emotions. "You have been the world champion 3 times. You're obviously the quickest driver. Give it up and let's go fishing," is what Sid says. They both share the same hobby, but Senna's response to that is chilling. "There are some things which we have no control over. I cannot quit. I have to go on." That would be the very last conversation between the two. It's the day of the race, and Senna arrives at the track early, but he skips his usual pre-race routine and instead decides to meet with a former teammate to discuss the improvement of safety in Formula One. Something had to change. Accidents like these cannot be just a thing people kinda brushed over. But before he knows it, he has to start racing himself. As the drivers line up on the grid, the atmosphere is heavy. Senna thinks about the accident, and he wants to hold up a flag to show respect after he finishes the race. And it begins. But the moment the race begins, chaos ensues immediately. A massive crash involving Petrol Lamy and JJ Leto sends debris flying into the crowd, and it injures 8 fans and a police officer. The safety car is immediately deployed, and it forces the rest of the drivers to slow down and navigate this crash. Senna, as always, is in first place, focused. This was an absolute terrible start to a race that already had a tense atmosphere. At 2:17 p.m, the race restarts. Senna leads the race, followed closely by Michael Schumacher. On the 7th lap, Senna approaches the perilous Tamburello curve, and his car loses control. He suddenly slides off the track, going straight into the concrete wall at nearly 190 miles per hour. The impact is traumatizing. The right front wheel as well as the suspension strikes Senna's helmet. His car slides to a halt, and smoke begins to rise. The world stops for a couple of seconds that feel like hours, and for just a moment, Senna's head moves ever so slightly. Might he actually be okay? But then, nothing. The marshals rush to the scene. Sid Watkins and medical teams arrive within minutes, and they pull Senna from the wreckage. They perform emergency treatment right there on the track, and his car is lifted away while he's transported to a hospital, where doctors desperately fight to save him. At 2:55 p.m, 35 minutes after the crash, the race is resumed. But nobody watching or racing is really thinking about who's gonna win this race. They're all wondering whether or not Senna is alright. The race actually experiences another small accident before painfully ending, and just a couple of hours later at 6:40 p.m, the world receives the sad news. Senna is dead. His official time of death is recorded as 2:17 p.m, the exact moment of impact. His death shook the entire world. Over 3 million people lined the streets of Sao Paulo for his funeral. A legend was gone. Believe it or not, this is far from the worst disaster the world of motorsports has witnessed. This next case will shock you to your core.
85 people died in this tragedy.
It's June 11th, 1955. The 24 Hours of Le Mans is one of the most prestigious endurance races in the world. As the name already hints, teams have to compete to cover the greatest distance within 24 hours. The race has been running annually since 1923, stopping only for wars and sometimes strikes. Everybody is excited. Over 300,000 spectators have gathered along the track, just waiting to witness the best drivers and the most advanced race cars of their era. But by the end of these 24 hours, people would remember this event for a very different reason. The Circuit de la Sarthe, the home of Le Mans, is a unique mix of public roads and private track sections, stretching 8.5 miles through the French countryside. It actually features one of the longest straightaways in motorsport at the time, the Mulsanne Straight, a 3.7-mile section, which meant that the drivers could only focus on speed without worrying about any turns. Now, despite the extreme speeds that these athletes could actually achieve, there were barely any safety measures at all. Things actually have not changed since the 1920s, although the speed of the cars have doubled since then. Between the spectators and the heavy race cars were only wooden fences, ditches, or just slow mounds of earth, so there was essentially nothing separating the cars from the audience. And to add to that, a majority of the drivers didn't wear seatbelts. They thought that it was simply safer to be thrown from a crashing vehicle than to be trapped inside. It was a tragedy bound to happen. Some of the biggest names in racing were attending this event. Juan Manuel Fangio, the legendary Argentinian driver, was battling against Mike Hawthorne, the driver for Jaguar. After the race started, for over 2 hours, Mike and Juan traded positions, pushing their cars to the absolute limit. The crowd was watching history unfold. But then, on lap 35, things take a dark turn. At 6:26 p.m, Mike is signaled to pit for fuel, and as he approaches the pit lane, he pulls over to the right and brakes. Now his Jaguar is equipped with disc brakes, a very new technology that made him slow down way faster than any other car on the track. So for the other drivers, the car almost magically comes to a stop. Directly behind him, Lance Macklin is completely caught off guard by the sudden brake, and he just instinctively swerves right to avoid hitting Mike. But for a brief moment, he loses control and drifts into the racing line. And that's when Pierre Levé's Mercedes-Benz arrives at full speed. Pierre has less than a second to react, and he isn't fast enough. His car slams into the back of Lance's car, and it acts like a ramp. The impact sends Pierre's Mercedes into the air, into the direction of the crowd. The car lands between the spectators and the track, but it slams into a concrete barrier, absolutely disintegrating on impact. The hood and other large parts collapse into pieces and fly into the crowd like shrapnel. The engine block, a massive piece of metal weighing over 400 pounds, bounces into the stands, and it instantly crushes multiple people. In a matter of seconds, this event has turned into a tragedy. Debris flies in all possible directions, turning into basically projectiles. And then the fuel tank ignites. But this is nowhere near the end. The Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR was built with an ultralight magnesium alloy, a material that was highly flammable, and the firefighters who rush to the scene are not aware of the reaction that it has with water. They try to put out the flame, which makes the fire explode even further. The wreck was now a big, white, hot pile that would burn for hours. Pierre is killed instantly. He is thrown from the car upon impact, and his body lands on a track. In the stands, more than 80 spectators perish, and over 120 people are seriously injured. Some were decapitated, and others just burned until they passed. It was an event unlike anything the world has ever seen. The other drivers fortunately survived, with Mike, who was the one who actually braked and caused the initial chain reaction, actually carrying on with the race for hours. Yes, the race was not stopped. Organizers said that halting the event would cause mass panic and just prevent ambulances from reaching the injured. So as the medical teams pulled the people from the stands, the remaining cars continued to race. And Mike would actually go on to win the race after several hours of additional driving, and he would be photographed celebrating with champagne. The next race also continued on, although 2 lives were lost brutally in a matter of seconds. Tom Price wasn't a household name in the world of Formula 1, and his stats weren't the best. He only had 2 podium finishes and 19 points to his name. But those who watched him race knew that he had a talent and a future in the sport. Born in Wales in 1949, Tom was a late bloomer in the world of motorsports. He started competitive racing at the age of 20. Which is actually later than most. But what he lacked in early experience, he actually made up for with grit. In 1974, he earned his place in Formula 1, driving for the small token racing team, before moving to Shadow. And this is where he would build his reputation as a fearless and fast driver. By 1975, Tom scored his first ever podium, finishing 3rd in Austria. The race, however, didn't end in a normal fashion. The track was actually so rain-soaked that it had to be stopped after the 29th lap. But Tom actually managed to drive through the rain like no other. His ability to control his car set him apart from everybody else, which is how he started making a name for himself. In 1976, he repeated the feat in Brazil. And although his Shadow team lacked the resources of other top-tier competitors, Tom still always managed to put up a pretty decent fight. Now, not just harsh weather showed Tom's grit. In the same year, during the German Grand Prix, Tom was about to finish 2nd behind Carlos Reutemann, when suddenly fuel started leaking into his cockpit during his final laps. It would burn his skin and almost blind him with fumes. But despite that, he managed to power through and finish 4th, which he got the Joe Siffert Award for. But grit wouldn't be able to stop him from losing his life just a year later. Tom joined the South African Grand Prix in 1977, And although exciting, it wasn't his first race. Until lap 21, Tom was running mid-pack, which was not unusual for him. In general, everything went as normal. That is until Renzo Zorzi, Tom's teammate, had to stop his car. He had engine trouble, and so he pulled over. But just when he tried to leave, his car caught on fire. Two of the young untrained marshals rushed onto the circuit, one of them carrying a 40-pound fire extinguisher, not really thinking about the fact that they were running directly into the path of oncoming cars. The first marshal was able to run across with no problem, but the second one, Frederick, the one who was carrying the extinguisher, was slightly behind him. And at the same time, Tom Price was now approaching the spot where Renzo stopped. In front of him was Hans Joachim Stuck, and they were both driving at around 170 miles per hour. And then Hans sees the marshal. He is able to swerve at the very last second and avoids actually hitting them. But Tom, who's right behind him, has literally no time to react, and so he strikes the marshal at full speed, throwing his body into the air and tearing him apart. The marshal loses his life in an instant, but that is not the end of this terrible accident. The fire extinguisher that he was holding flies into the air and strikes Tom's head with incredible force. Tom's helmet completely shatters and also breaks Tom's skull. He passes away in an instant too. His car continues to drive down the track and crashes into Jacques Lafitte at the first corner. Jacques exits the car, angry at what just happened, but then he realizes that there was no conscious driver to blame. The race continues, but the paddock is in shock. Two lives lost in an instant, a rising star and a young marshal. Human errors are inevitable, but this next story is about a man who lost everything trying to get revenge. It's May 8, 1982, and the qualifying session for the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder is nearing its final moments. Ferrari's star driver, Gilles Villeneuve, is pushing his car to the absolute limits. He's not fueled by ambition though, but by something much more primal: betrayal. In exactly 8 minutes, history will change forever though. Born in Canada in 1950, Gilles was around engines all of his life. His first actual motorsport career was snowmobiling, which he gained international recognition for. The moment he tried out racing though, he was hooked. His big break came in 1976 at a Formula event in Trois-Rivières, where top F1 drivers were invited to Canada to race rookies. Gilles managed to outperform seasoned Formula 1 drivers, and his performance was so impressive that McLaren actually invited him to race at the 1977 Grand Prix as a third car. He completely skipped the stages of F2 and F3. In practice, he would spin out quite frequently, but he would never actually hit any barriers. He was simply trying out the limits of the car without damaging it, and eventually actually showed the raw speed he could achieve. And this ability to test out a car without actually crashing caught the attention of one man in particular, Enzo Ferrari. The old man saw something special, and he was right. By 1982, Gilles won 6 races for Ferrari, and he was already a legend among the passionate, die-hard Ferrari fans. They really resonated with his driving style. His racing was absolutely phenomenal, but there was one thing that actually made him even more noticeable: his extremely loyal and maybe even naive character. In 1979, he gave up his own chances to be champion to help his teammate Jody Scheckter to win the title. He believed that Ferrari would repay his loyalty when his time came, but in 1982, that trust was crushed. The San Marino Grand Prix should have been Gilles' chance to get paid back. Most of the British teams are boycotting the race due to political disputes, which only meant that Ferrari had a golden opportunity. Their only real competition, Renault, retired, which leaves Gilles and his teammate Didier Pironi the only ones actually in the race to win. There are only 14 cars present after all. And now during the race, it is indeed the case that Gilles and Didier are in first and second, and there's literally nobody else in sight. The only thing stopping them from winning would be their own cars. They consume a lot of fuel, and if they both push them to their absolute limits, they could face the risk of running out. So after a while, the pits tell them to slow down their speed so they could actually finish the race. Gilles has been leading the majority of the race so far, and so in his mind, he thinks that they would simply hold the position of first and second in that order and just slowly decelerate. But his own teammate has a different idea. Didier suddenly flies past him, which shocks Gilles. He's not angry though. It could be that Didier simply wants to put on a show for the fans who want to see something exciting during an already not so exciting Grand Prix. And with one lap to go, Didier actually slows down again and lets Gilles pass him. He really was just bringing some excitement to the race. He knew that Gilles is actually the one who was in first place. But on the very last lap, Didier suddenly starts driving at max speed again and secures the win, while Gilles is just 0.3 seconds behind. On the podium, Gilles is livid. He doesn't celebrate or even acknowledge the official winner. He has been sacrificing everything for Ferrari. He feels betrayed by his own team, by his own friend. 2 weeks later, Gilles was ready to get his revenge. For him, it was war. On the qualifying days at the Belgian Grand Prix, he gave his absolute best to beat Didier. On Friday, he was the 5th fastest racer, but for him, more importantly, he was faster than Didier by 10 whole places. He didn't hold back. May 8th was the last qualifying round for Gilles, and this time Didier was just a bit faster than him, and Gilles hated that feeling. And for the last couple of laps, he isn't able to find a clear way to pass him. And his Ferrari tires are only designed for a couple of fast rounds. They were losing grip at a concerning rate. But one last time, he tries to overtake him. Gilles actually approaches Jochen Mass, who's on a slow lap. And Jochen sees Gilles and swerves to the right to actually let him move past him. But this is when Gilles moves to the right as well, at the same time, trying to overtake him that way. And the front left tire of Gilles hits the right rear tire of Jochen.
Il a heurté l'arrière et on voit voilà la Ferrari qui vient de se disloquer après avoir heurté la marche de Jochen Mass.
The crash is so fast that it sends Gilles' Ferrari flying. The car rotates in midair and it flips and cartwheels over and over again. The force is so tremendous that his seatbelt fails and he flies out of his car, his body flying over 164 feet. When he lands, his helmet is ripped apart from him and he ends up in a catch fence. His neck is broken. Doctors arrive almost immediately. Against all the odds, Gilles still has a pulse. He's rushed to a university hospital, but they can immediately tell that he suffers from massive neck and spinal injuries, and they simply can't save him. At 9:12 p.m., the news reaches the rest of the world. Gilles Villeneuve is gone because of a qualifying round. His son, Jacques Villeneuve, would later fulfill the dreams Gilles never got to complete, winning the 1997 Formula 1 World Championship. This next case might not seem like the most horrifying accident, but its ending is just truly heartbreaking.
Yes, he is. Oh my God!
The 1973 edition of the Indianapolis 500 is widely considered one of the lowest points in American motorsport history, with a good reason. At the center of this event is David Earl, also known as Sweet Savage. He entered the Indy 500 with an STP-sponsored Eagle Offenhauser, just ready to dominate the race. During the practice rounds, Sweet Savage was the fastest driver. On the first day of qualifying, the strong winds actually slowed him down by a lot. And despite these conditions, he managed to break the track record with a 4-lap qualifying average of 196 miles per hour. His performance was great, but the race unfortunately was doomed from the beginning. On May 12th, during the final practice sessions before the qualifications, Art Pollard, a veteran racer, lost control of his car in turn 1. His vehicle snapped sideways, slamming into the outside wall and then smashed into the inside barrier. He was gone. The first life that this race would take, and it wouldn't be the last. On race day, the rain continued and delayed the start a total of 4 times. But at 3 p.m, the green flag waved and the drivers could finally give it their all. But the excitement that both the athletes and the fans had quickly turned into horror. David Salt Walter, one of the drivers, almost instantly loses control and causes a massive pileup on the front straight. His car is launched into the grandstands and spins over and over again. It sends debris and fuel flying into the crowd. The car, or more specifically everything around it, is on fire. Salt suffers severe burns and broken bones, but somehow he gets to live. The event doesn't take him away too. Nonetheless, more than a dozen spectators are injured, and the race of course comes to a halt. And then the rain returns. It is an absolute catastrophe of an event, and so the organizers decide to push it to Tuesday instead. But when Tuesday rolls around, it's not possible either. The track is too wet, so they push it to Wednesday, May 30th. And that's when fate catches up with Sweet Savage. The race doesn't start off with an accident, but it ends with one.
The race was stopped.
Savage Sweet is leading the race on lap 42 when he has to pit for fuel and fresh tires. Everything goes smoothly, and before he knows it, he's back on the track. His immediate target is Al Unser, who's now driving in front of him, but he's actually about to pit too. On lap 58, all of these plans go out of the window though. As Savage Sweet comes through turn 4, his car suddenly snaps sideways. At nearly 200 miles per hour, the Eagle Offenhauser veers to the left at the exit. It slides across the track before slamming into the inside wall.
Yes, he is. Oh my God, it's Savage! Oh! What a crash! God, right.
The car, that is now full of fuel, explodes on impact. The force of the crash is so extreme that the car completely disintegrates. It sends debris flying in all directions and a fireball erupts. And in the midst of it is Savage Sweet, alive. Despite the violence of this crash, he never loses consciousness and is actually moving. He's talking. Rescuers frantically try to get him out of this burning hell, as the world can do nothing but just watch. Savage Sweet is rushed to the hospital, and although he suffered severe leg fractures, the doctors are certain that he will survive. But this is not a story with a happy ending. 30 days after his accident, Sweet Savage dies. And it wasn't because of the crash, it was because of a contaminated blood transfusion, a simple mistake made by the hospital. The 1973 Indy 500 was cursed.